Okay, looks like we have a critical mass of people. So welcome everybody, and thank you so much for joining. As I'm sure you will all have experienced, when law firms generally put these kinds of webinars on, you're given a niche specialist from a specific and narrow area. But TLD are specialist generalists, and that's what makes us different. Our lawyers are highly experienced general counsel with extensive in-house pedigree. So I guess what really makes us different is that we've all been there, seen it, and done it. So today we're going to have a whistle-stop tour of some of the risks that are faced by a CFO from exactly that perspective of someone who has been there, seen it, and done it. And so I'm joined by Bitesh Solanky, who is an experienced in-house lawyer, having worked across a range of different sectors. And I think so that I can do him justice, I am going to let Bitesh introduce himself.
Thank you, Sarah, for your kind words. Yes, I have worked in-house now for probably, 20 years. And I thrive in supporting businesses finding solutions to their problems. Now, the reason I've highlighted these risks, financial reporting, corporate governance, fraud, data privacy, contract management, insolvency, employment, tax, ESG, and anti-bribery and corruption, is because they keep cropping up. I understand the CFOs will have numerous other risks on their plate, and some of them which will be sector specific. But the reason these are highlighted is because throughout my career, they've come up in some way or form, or have come out of the blue from the side, and that's why they need to stay on the risk register for the CFO.
That's brilliant. Thank you. It would be great to have a look at areas that might not receive the attention that they should do because of that kind of stretch or that lack of bandwidth. And so I think it makes sense to look at the kind of the broadest cross-functional organizational risks. And you mentioned ESG, corporate governance, and bribery being areas that often get a lighter touch, actually. So maybe start with ESG.
Why so ESG,
why is it so important for CFOs?
So ESG, in environmental social governance. So from my experience as an in-house lawyer, that should be the heartbeat of the business. It's no longer a nice to have, it's a must have. You've got investors, regulators, consumers, all placing a greater importance on sustainability and ethical practices. Businesses want to do business with ethical businesses, people that are focusing on the sustainability and also the growth of the business. Failing to address ESG can have a detrimental effect on the company. You won't get preferential financial rates if you don't focus on ESG goals. It will damage your reputation. You've just got to look at Dieselgate. What happened to Volkswagen? They didn't meet the environmental standards, and they faced hefty fines and reduced their brand image. Despite people are probably still driving in VWs, so they've not been completely let off the hook yet. So,
but certainly, I guess looking at it through the lens of the CFO, the things that might bring it to life, as you said, are the the preferential rates that come from for having robust ESG practices.
Absolutely.
And certainly, the business where I was last GC, we did obtain preferential rates because we did have robust ESG reporting, and so it certainly brought that to life for me. And certainly, those other kind of aspects of where there may be financial penalties and things like that are certainly going to kind of make CFOs prick their ears up. So how can CFOs then kind of integrate ESG into their kind of overall risk strategies?
It starts with setting up the right ESG framework. So it's through reporting and transparency. ESG should be integral to the business, and depending on the business size, you may have to file or submit on an annual basis energy and carbon reports. So this will demonstrate year on year what you're doing to reduce your carbon footprint. In my previous roles, most of the companies I've worked in focused heavily on the E, which is great. You're doing something to be sustainable. You're removing plastics. You're reducing your carbon footprint on an annual basis. But what companies tend to sometimes forget is the S and G. These are equally important. So you've got to manage your relationships with your employees, stakeholders, suppliers, and how you engage with the community. You want a workplace that's inclusive and diverse. And in order to do that, you've got to undertake regular reviews, stakeholder engagement, conduct a gap analysis, of what your ESG framework looks like. Every business's framework will be completely different. Not one size does not fit all, because it's going to be depending on the sector specific elements. So these are all essential for a CFO and senior leaders to look at and see what the criteria is for the ESG agenda before they implement the framework and then roll it out to the wider business.
Yeah, and as you said, I suppose the G often gets sort of scant focus. But if you're a CFO in a busy organization that maybe doesn't have quite a strong focus, as I said, on the kind of the functional responsibilities, so where do the kind of people aspects of D&I sit and things like that, then really you're kind of looking to zoom out, aren't you, at the kind of corporate governance level, make sure there's a framework in place and that responsibilities are clear. So can you kind of help us dive a little bit more into the governance side of things and how that kind of how risks associated with governance play out?
So governance is fundamental to running of any business, and I think some of the callers on the call will have different governance strategies in place for their business, but failing in corporate governance is just reputational damage. It can lead to the collapse of a business. You've just got to look at Carillion, which was largely due to inadequate governance controls in place. So CFOs, senior leadership teams need to look at the governance framework. Is it robust? Does it do what the business wants it to do? Does it support the growth of the business? Is it engaging with key stakeholders? And again, I keep using this word, do a gap analysis. But if you're not reviewing and auditing your practices, you're never going to know where the weaknesses and where the strengths lie. So corporate governance is, it's part of ESG. It's the G, it's the governance, it's the whole umbrella on how your business is run and how effectively you do it at obviously supporting the growth of the business. Now, most companies will engage in doing an employee engagement survey. They'll do a supplier survey, even consumer feedback forms. Now, these are all really good tools to use. Just make sure you do something with the data. Don't just sit on the data and forget about it, thinking we've done that now, we've ticked the box. Do something with it, act on it, and that's the most important thing to do. I've worked in too many organizations to know where that data is sat on for some time and that nothing's done with it. So
yeah, I think we sort of keep coming back to that thing that I sort of said at the top around having been there, seen it and done it. And I wonder if this is one of the ways that when you kind of step in as a GC, you have that kind of privileged position of being able to take that holistic view. What does that look like when you start working with a new business as a GC?
So when you work in house, as most of us here at TOD have done, we're not just lawyers, we're business people. We understand the risks, we understand how the business operates, and we can basically help and make decisions with you, for you, because we've been in those situations. So if I was to go into a business today and I didn't know anything about that business, the first thing I would do is I'd engage with the key stakeholders, understand where the key risks are, prepare some sort of heat map on what are the key areas that need to look at initially. So, for example, you might have a contract review process that's not adequate, it's not fit for purpose. Your contracts might not be managed properly. The sign-off process, there's people in the business signing things off when they shouldn't be signing things off. So I might look at that first and narrow that review process down to make sure that contracts are only signed by certain individuals, whether you have a delegation of authority in place that can be discussed. And then also on the regulatory side, if that's you're being heavily, there's certain financial reportings that you have to do, but some larger business will have to file modern slavery statements, payment practice report, carbon report, you name it. There's so many reports that now need to be filed, and sometimes it can be overlooked. And I've worked in businesses where the modern slavery statement hasn't been filed, it's been forgotten, and then the 11th hour you've got to prepare it. Fine, that's okay, but then the following year you've got to show what steps you've taken to literally audit your supply chain to ensure there is no modern slavery taking place. And the same goes for payment practices reporting. It's taking that holistic view, bird's eye view, look at the business, focus on the key risks, but ensure those risks align with the business's sustainability. Pretty much like ensuring that their revenue stream continues to grow.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I can see how a busy CFO who's spinning all the plates would really benefit from that kind of holistic view. So we've talked about the kind of big overarching aspects of your wheel. I wonder if it's worth us kind of deep diving into some of the individual ones. Maybe start with data privacy. I know that that's had a huge focus since 2018. Do you think that that's something that gets overlooked by CFOs sometimes?
In my experience, data privacy is always going to be important. You know, you've got the use of AI now, and that's going to throw out privacy issues in its own right. It gets overlooked probably due to financial concerns. The businesses that I've worked in, we used to get a lot of DSARs. So there's a team, an outsourced team, continually redacting pages and pages of work, and that used to come to about £60,000 a year just doing redaction work. So they see it as a cost and they don't put the importance in it sometimes. But data privacy is really important. Contracts need to be aligned with the business's data privacy obligations. You know, failing to adhere to that can you can get regulatory fines, loss of customer trust. So the best way to do it is regular audits. I don't know how many people on this call last checked their privacy T's and C's on their website, or even their contracts, or even their IT contracts. So it's really important on an annual basis to review your data protection policies and stay updated with regulations and mitigate any of these risks.
That makes sense. I guess another one that may be on the minds of CFOs is fraud. It's a persistent risk, and albeit that there's been advances in technology and controls, businesses still, as we read in the press, fall victim to those kind of fraudulent activities. What can CFOs do to safeguard their organisations?
So fraud is criminals are always going to be ahead of the game and try and defraud a company. Any opportunity they can get. You know, the Tesserae Valerie got what fine? They were not all fine, sorry. They were defrauded for £40 million in 2018. So fraud prevention has to be, it's always going to be important, and the companies will think, it doesn't happen to us. I've worked in a company where fake employee accounts were created by a certain manager, and that manager would then ensure that payroll paid these fake employees into his bank account.
Oh, wow.
You know, but use technology, use systems, employee checks for a situation like I've just explained. You know, fraudulent employee training is going to be really important, and foster an ethical corporate culture. Because fraud is something you might not think about. If you're paying a supplier invoice, you'll pay it. I've known fake suppliers, to put in fake invoices and they've been paid. So it's really important to keep that at the forefront of your mind, because it will crop up when you least expect it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose kind of that neatly segues us into ethics and anti-bribery and corruption. So how can organizations, given the vast landscape that this covers now, how can they make sure that they're remaining compliant?
So anti-bribery and corruption applies to every single business without fail. It doesn't matter how small you are or how large you are. Every business should have some form of policy, call it a gifts and hospitality policy, which sets out what gifts can be accepted at a certain level, and anything above that level needs possibly board sign off. Put in place a process whereby gifts are logged, recorded, or just blanketly not accepted. I've worked in organisations where obviously we're hitting the festive period. Gifts would not be accepted by the board. They'd just sit in the boardroom, and then employees would get a raffle ticket before the Christmas break, and everybody would walk away with either a hamper or a bottle of wine or a cheese board. So be careful when you're being gifted something, because it might come with I expect this in return. Now, we all know in the media, Keir Starmer's getting free suits. So I wish I could get some free suits. But, I think gifts are okay as long as it's transparent, as long as policies are clear and a process has been followed. You've got to look at, I think it was 2017, Rolls-Royce were fined, £671 million for bribery. So,
wow. They're not small numbers, are they?
No. And so stay away from corrupt activities.
And I can see where when you're in a kind of fast growth or a scale up kind of organization, these kinds of policies are the ones that sit on the to-do list. People know they need them, but it's just having the bandwidth to kind of carve out the framework and get all of that kind of order in place. And I suppose, we come back to that kind of holistic view of understanding what's the checklist and kind of getting it all ticked off. But the segueing, using your example of the employees who all won cheese boards and hampers, employees is another area of risk, isn't it? That kind of people risk. Tell us about that.
Absolutely. Yeah, so employment will always be a key risk for most businesses because it's going to lead to how do you retain staff, how do you train staff, how do you handle disputes, how are you going to manage benefits? If you've got high staff turnover, you're clearly doing something quite wrong. So it's really important for CFOs and their senior leadership team to review employment contracts, make sure they're in line with legislation. If you're employing consultants, you need to decide whether they're inside or outside IR35 to make sure you don't get stung that way. Make sure your compensation's competitive. So it's a regular review. HR policies are reviewed. I'd suggest, depending on legislation updates, possibly every 2 years, to make sure that you're in line with what you're supposed to do, because companies will forget doing employment contracts because they'll hire the staff, then they'll forget it. And I've worked in organizations where staff have been there 3 years without an employment contract, which is, it's not right and it's in breach. So it's really important to have these risks on the risk register, and whether you talk through them on a monthly basis at board level or at senior management level, just to make sure that they're there.
Yeah.
Don't review them quarterly. Don't review them every year. Keep an eye on the key risks and also the emerging risks that the businesses might face, which are sector specific.
Yeah, absolutely. And one that probably isn't sector specific, although I suppose it will impact some businesses and some sectors more than others, but is my personal favorite kind of secret nerd area, is contract management, because this is one that often, in my experience, gets neglected as businesses grow and as pace kind of gathers momentum. What kind of financial losses and legal challenges can that kind of throw up if you don't manage your contracts effectively?
Failing to manage contracts it's disastrous. I've been in organizations where managers at a certain level would sign contracts, 2-year terms, 3-year terms, they'd sign auto renewal terms, and then you come in and you're basically unraveling all of that to ensure that doesn't happen again. So what I've done in the past is make sure I put a process in place, call it a contract review process. Make sure contracts align with business goals. You've got the right terms agreed, the right term agreed, the right indemnities and warranties agreed, the right PI level agreed, and make sure only a few people can review contracts. Ideally, if you don't have an in-house legal team, external lawyers or a contract manager, and make sure the process is followed where only a key people can sign and bind the company to a legal agreement. And that could be a director. So initially you might create a bottleneck, but once you've cleaned that process up, then you can do a delegation of authority and say, right, senior management team, anything up to $5,000, you might be allowed to sign. But it will depend on the business. Failing to manage contracts can be really detrimental, and the litigation that follows out from that it's ridiculous. So yeah, really important.
Yeah, the age-old kind of need to have a bit of an amnesty, because half the contracts are in Bob's bottom drawer of his desk in pre-COVID days. Yeah, I know that well. So they're all critical areas that all require oversight, and so you can see why a CFO has so much on their desk. But let's circle back to those kind of initial risks that we talked about, the ones that would have the more obvious scrutiny from the CFO, like financial reporting, tax and insolvency. How do those kind of mesh together? How do they intersect with the other ones like ESG and fraud and things like that? How does all this kind of hang together?
So all these risks are all linked and connected. Robust financial reporting will help you identify discrepancies that may indicate fraud. Proper tax management will ensure compliance and avoid penalties, which is part of good corporate governance. ESG factors can influence financial performance and risk management strategies. So it's always great to have a holistic approach and look at your key areas of risk. Most of the businesses will have a risk register, which should be reviewed on a regular basis. So you'd have your current inherent risks, you'll have your emerging risks, and then you've got a horizon scan to see what future risks you're going to face. Key thing at the moment, everyone's talking about AI, businesses are using AI. What risks are these businesses going to face by the use of AI? Are you paying for it? Are you using it free of charge? If you're using a free of charge version, the data won't belong to you, it'll belong to the AI company. So you've got to be careful about these things and how you're going to protect your business from losing its data if you're doing something like that, or allowing staff to do something like that.
It's the totality of risk, sort of, as I sit here listening to you, sort of feels pretty overwhelming. There's a lot of it. There's a lot of spinning plates. So it sounds like a kind of proactive, integrated approach is what's needed. But what, CFOs are in the weeds dealing with the business as usual, and they're also required to kind of zoom back out and take that kind of strategic focus. How can they balance all of these risks whilst being able to continue to offer the business the strategic focus that it needs?
So the idea of risk management is not to stop you from doing business. It's to keep you focused on doing business in the right way, to make sure that you're keeping an eye out for what might be coming around the corner, what might be emerging. So having a risk strategy, a risk appetite, a framework to establishing what these risks are and how they're monitored, and who in the senior leadership team or even the wider business looks at risk. So clear communication from all the way from the board, all the way down to the wider staff members, all know what the key risks are for the business and how anything should be reported up the chain. So transparency and communication are really important. But the CFO shouldn't get, I don't think they should be worried with the amounts of the work they do, as long as they've got the right team and structure in place. And I think that's going to be the key thing. If you've got the right team and structure in place, these things can be managed. And with the help of external advisors like ourselves, we can help support in creating a framework that will be sustainable for the business.
Brilliant. So that's great. That's really helpful, and I can see how you'd kind of come in and have that ability to take the holistic view and to have the mental bandwidth to take the building of the framework and the heat maps and all of the other things that you've referenced while you've been talking. Something that the CFO doesn't have the bandwidth to get to. So I think that's really helpful. So a few minutes left. Any other final thoughts before we go to questions about thoughts or advice for CFOs in kind of navigating this complex landscape?
I think from my experience, foster a culture of transparency and accountability. You're in business to do well. You're in business because you enjoy it. You support the local economy by employing people in the local economy. So why would you not want a business that's holistic in its approach, positive and financially secure as it moves forward into the future with the new landscape? That's
brilliant. I can't see any questions, so probably wrap up and give people a chance to stretch their legs before they go back to their desk for the afternoon. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us this afternoon.
Thank you.
And I hope everyone has a great day and rest of the afternoon.
See you later.
Thanks all.